Hello, dear readers. How are you doing? I want to make a video talking about the books I read over the course of July. This is a bit delayed. I meant to film this video over the past weekend at the beginning of the month, but I was really ill over the past week. I've had quite a bad cold. You wouldn't really know that because I've still been uploading lots of videos, but that's just because I had filmed some stuff in advance, and when things go up isn't necessarily when I filmed it. So yeah, but basically for the past 7 days I've had a really bad cold, and of course since it's over the past 6 months, anytime I just cough, I'm suddenly have this panic like, oh, is that the virus? And I really don't think this cold was the virus, because just the whole cycle of the colds is very similar to lots of past colds I get. I'm somebody who tends to get quite a lot of colds. But I thought maybe I should just make sure. And so over the weekend, I did order a COVID test, and so I took it and I sent it off. And that was 4 days ago, but I've still not had the results of that. And it says that you should get the results within 48 hours. So yeah, it's been 4 days now, and it says that after 5 days, you should contact them if you hadn't had the results yet. So tomorrow I'll contact them if I don't hear. But yeah, this makes me, I don't know, I think it's slightly worrying. I mean, I'm sure they're like overwhelmed and very busy, but yeah, that it's like taking so long to get the results when testing is like so crucial to clamping down on this virus, and and tracking it, and people that you were in contact with, and that it should have a really fast response. And so yeah, I don't know, I just personally I'm finding it a bit concerning, since this is really dictating how we're living all of our lives. It makes me wonder about how accurate all the statistics are, because I'm sure a lot of them aren't. So yeah, I don't know, it's sort of concerning. But anyway, I'll get on to talking about the books, because that's what I really want to talk about, and I am mostly feeling better now. I just have this slightly stuffed up head still, that in that kind of cold way. Anyway, I read a lot of great books over the course of July, or at least most of them were really great. So I'm really excited to talk about these. The first one is a memoir, actually, called The Fragments of My Father by Sam Mills. And this is such a poignant and moving memoir about how Sam Mills, when her mother died, she became the primary carer for her father, who suffers from very serious mental health issues. And so yeah, she found herself taking this role, and then so sort of finding more about her father than she knew before. She always knew there was something sort of different about him, but the family never really talked all that much in depth about his mental health issues. And so yeah, so she discovers this, and then takes on the role of caring for him, and all the responsibilities of that, and finds herself frequently very overwhelmed by all the tasks she has to do, and the constant worrying about him that he might like sort of be tipped over the edge. He goes in and out of mental health facilities when he has some periods of breakdown, and it's just a very sympathetic look how she really loves him and wants to care for him, but yeah, just about the massive difficulties for this. And she branches this out to talk about how there's lots of people in society, in different families, who take on this role of carers, which is really a full-time job, but then are meant to maintain their own lives on top of that, which can often be quite difficult. So they have to sort of support themselves and have their own job, but then also have this job of a carer. And so a lot of it is talking about these like larger issues about how this is a real problem, that there's not often that much government support or support amongst different families or in the community for people who are carers. There's lots of instances of this, of carers who are sort of stuck at home with people who aren't able to go out as much, because they have to spend so much time at home caring for somebody in their family or a loved one. And yeah, so I found this very moving, but also because Sam Mills is a writer, she looks back on past literary relationships where there's been mental health issues. So she looks at the two different examples of Leonard and Virginia Woolf, and how obviously Virginia Woolf suffered suffered from mental health issues throughout most of her life, and how Leonard was her husband, but was also her carer through a lot of her life. And I've never read all that much biographical information about Virginia, actually. So yeah, some of the details of that, and just the extent of Virginia's mental health problems, I learned a lot more about, and I thought that was very moving, and it gave me a lot of sympathy for Leonard Woolf, because I think she talks about this, how in a lot of biographical accounts, Leonard is seen as this almost like kind of oppressive force, and that he's trying to control her and control her situation so that she doesn't, go off the rails, as it were. But how he was kind of justified in a lot of this, because he could see how easily, she could slip off, and how things could go really wrong. And so she talks about that, but then also the relationship of Zelda and F. Scott Fitzgerald, and how Zelda Fitzgerald was someone who suffered from a lot of mental health issues as well, and how this marriage was much more complicated, because there was a lot of alcohol involved, and so it was a much more tumultuous relationship, and there was a lot of resentment between them, and also that because Zelda wanted to be a writer as well, and how F. Scott Fitzgerald sort of suppressed her ability to get things published, and how, and there's a whole question about how much did they collaborate on some of his work, but then he just sort of took the credit for it, and I think it's pretty much basically known that there are some short stories that basically she wrote, but that or that were like heavily inspired his stories, but then he sort of just took the full credit for it. And so so she looks at how these mental health issues sort of impact upon the artistic process as well, and artistic relationships, and so I thought this is such a moving and poignant memoir, and and there's been other books which have looked at sort of the current situation and paired it with the lives of writers and the work of writers. But this does it in such a moving and powerful way, while also making a larger political message about the role of carers in our society. So I'd highly recommend this memoir. I also read the novel Love After Love by Ingrid Persaud. This is a novel that I've wanted to read ever since it was published earlier this year. But recently I've been wanting to read it more as part of the Caribathon. It was one of the novels I most wanted to get to. So even though we're sort of past the Caribathon, I still wanted to read this, and I'm so glad I did, because I absolutely loved this story and loved the characters in it. So I read this partly physically, but also on audiobook, and I'm glad I read the audiobook as well, because the author narrates that, and hearing the inflection that she gives to a lot of the dialogue and the scenes of this book, I felt really brought it alive. And even when I was at home and just reading it at home, I started reading it aloud to myself as well, because I think it's one of those books that just, it's so vibrant, the dialogue of it, that when it's read aloud, you get a lot of the humor in it, and there's so many funny things in this book, even though there's lots of serious issues that it covers. It's very, very funny, but it also, reading aloud, like, brings out the poignancy of it as well. So it's primarily about three different characters, and the narrative revolves between their different points of view. So there's Betty, who is a woman who has been in an abusive relationship for a very long time, and that comes to an end very close at the start of this novel. And she has a son named Solo, and she also has a friend named Mr. Chaitan. So it's mainly about those three characters' points of view, and they're very close, but then they also conceal things from each other, and how some things come out into the light about their histories and about their identities, and this makes there are a lot of conflicts between them, and these very dramatic situations. And so it the novel plays out those different situations, and And I just felt so close to each character when it, you know, how in some novels, when it goes into lots of different points of view, you'll feel more sympathetic to one character over another. And I just thought all three of them were so brilliantly written. And I felt so much for them and could really understand and see their points of view in each of their narratives, but then also how they kind of misunderstood each other in some other parts. And one of the things I thought was really well done in this novel was the whole relationship between Betty and Mr. Chayton. Mr. Chayton, it turns out, is a homosexual, and they have a very close relationship, which is such a good friendship that, you know, they naturally almost want it to be romantic at some points and try to make it romantic, and that just doesn't work because that's not who he is. And how she handles the awkwardness and disappointment of that, I just thought was so well done. But then as the novel goes on and Solo gets older and more independent, it becomes really interesting, the conflicted relationship between him and his mother and the distance between him and Mr. Chayton. And although the close friendship that they have, he's a kind of surrogate father to him or father figure to him. And and I just thought all the relationships were done so well, and I just love these characters so much that I thought this was a brilliant and beautiful debut novel. Then I read the novel Big Girl, Small Town by Michelle Gallen, a Irish writer, and this novel is set in a Northern Irish border town and is the story of Magella, who's a young woman who works in a chip shop, so basically slinging fast food all day long. And the local people cruelly give her the nickname Jelly because she's slightly overweight, and she doesn't get along with a lot of the people in the town. She's quite independent and likes her own space, but then she finds herself becoming a figure of public fascination when her grandmother is found murdered in her home. And so it follows a week in her life after this incident occurs. And so there's this whole underlying mystery of that, about what happened to her grandmother, but also a mystery about what happened to her father, who has been missing since the Troubles. But it's framed in such a brilliant way because the whole novel is made up of lists of things that Magella isn't very keen on, and so it's you get all of her very like critical opinions about the people in the town. Yeah, and so you get this picture about how she's sort of maligned and not really understood, and also the very tense relationship that she has with her mother, and it's very funny how this is done, because it's just there's a lot of humor to this, even though it's quite a like glum situation where she's just working in this fast food restaurant, and there's a lot of late nights where drunken people come in demanding food, and it's just all feels a bit like grim, and it's something I can really relate to because before I moved to London, I worked in a fast food restaurant for quite a long time, and so like I understand the drudgery and repetition of this kind of work, and also the whole trouble of like dealing with a lot of the horrible customers that come in. I really like related to it in some ways, but also it's obviously set in a very particular place at a particular time, and so it's interesting because I feel like this novel is almost a cross between the novels Milkman by Anna Burns, because of the situation of a young woman in a Northern Irish town who's sort of brought under the public spotlight sort of against her will. But then also the novel Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine because Magella is also, I think, sort of borderline or actually autistic, so has trouble kind of relating to people, and a lot of her ways of relating to people she just sort of learns from watching other people and is almost just sort of copying their actions or doing what they tell her to do rather than her being actually feeling motivated to sort of say the things that she does, and so I feel like it's sort of a cross between those books, although I wasn't all that keen on the novel Eleanor Oliphant, but I felt like it did what that author wanted to do much better in this novel, in terms of the humor. I found it was like much more consistent and believable, and also so sort of like brings out the humanity of the character. And also with Anna Burns' Milkman, which I really admired in some ways, also had some slight issues with. And I felt like this is much more like sort of down to earth version of that, although it's, you know, it's slightly different what she wants to do in this than what Milkman wanted to do. So yeah, I think it's really, if you were a fan or sort of a fan of both of those books, then I'd really recommend this novel. But I just really recommend it anyway because I think it's really skillfully done and really engaging how she writes about this character who's just sort of pushed to the sides in her community, and how she grants her real dignity by giving her this narrative. I also read Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell, and I was really eager to read this novel just because it's a new David Mitchell novel, but also really curious to see what I was going to think of it, because I've had very mixed reactions to David Mitchell's writing in the past. So he's like, out of his recent work, I wasn't able to finish his novel The Bone Clocks because I just felt it got too fantastical and kind of silly, but I did really admire and enjoy his novel Slade House, which was much slimmer, and and this is another one of his sort of big novels, so I wasn't really sure how I was gonna feel about it, and David Mitchell's past novel Black Swan Green I really loved. It's probably one of my favorite books by him. I was just really curious how he was gonna take it, this subject on, because it's set during the late 1960s, during the psychedelic music scene in England, and he writes about the rise and fall of a band over a period of a few years. So it's a fictional band that he makes up, and it goes into the lives of each of the members of the band and their sort of backstories, how they sort of come together, the different ways they react to their growing musical fame. And there's always a slightly sort of fantasy side to David Mitchell's fiction. So I was wondering if that was going to enter into this, and it does in quite an interesting way. And also it brings in storylines from past novels. Like there's one of the band members is called Dezot. So in his past novel, what's it called? The Autumns of Jacob Dezot, which is a historical novel. It sort of connects with that novel in an interesting way. And then, also goes off much later in the book. It goes off in the slightly more like fantastical side of the story. But most of it is quite like realistic and set in this very clearly defined historical period, because it brings in a lot of the events, but also a lot of famous people from that time. So you do see there are sort of cameos in this novel from a lot of celebrities from that time. So there's like David Bowie, and there's Francis Bacon and Janis Joplin. Because the band grow increasingly famous, they have these sort of encounters along the way, which is a lot of fun. And I did really enjoy this novel for the most part. It's a really like pleasurable story, the way he like develops it all. But I feel like I would have appreciated it more if I was more personally interested in that whole music scene and this historical period. I do have a certain level of interest in and appreciation for, because it's a very significant time of history, but I'm just don't have quite like a passionate desire to like want to go back to this time. And I feel like part of this novel was just David Mitchell wishes he could have like been living in that time and been in a band during that time, and so go through all of those experiences. Also, I felt like nothing hugely unexpected happens in this novel. Like if you kind of imagined what a band rising to fame during that time would be like, and imagined the stories of different band members, like it wouldn't be too far off probably from what David Mitchell imagines for this novel. It wasn't cliched, it's all really well done, but it is quite interesting how it does have this sort of fantasy side underpinning some of the story, and how it like goes into that, which is kind of playful and fun. I don't think it's quite like as poignant or meaningful as probably he planned it to be, but I still thought it was quite like interesting and well done how he did that, how it the storyline plays out and climaxes. It is quite exciting in a way, so it isn't all entirely expected. So I just have sort of mixed feelings about this, and like enjoyed it, but I feel like it's not going to be one of my favorite books of the year, or one that really stands out for me. And if you're somebody who's read a lot of David Mitchell, I'd be really interested in your opinion about his sort of work overall and your relationship with it, with his many different novels. And then for something very different, just because I wanted to read something very silly, I got the audiobook for Trixie and Katya's Guide for Modern Womanhood. And just because I'm such a big like Drag Race fan and I'm a big fan of their series on YouTube, I wanted to get this book. And basically this book is just an extended episode of one of their series, their YouTube series. It's, you know, sort of a purportedly playing on sort of self-help books and, you know, these guides to being successful and beautiful, which obviously all their advice is completely horrible and bad, but also they make lots of cutting, insightful comments about the way we live now and, you know, our habits and behaviors and so yeah, this is just like silly, stupid fun that I really enjoyed. I mean, I'm much more of a Katya fan than a Trixie fan, I think, though they're both very hilarious and they both have their sort of areas of expertise or, you know, expertise that they go to. But overall, it's just dumb fun that made me laugh a lot. And then, as you may already know, because I already made a video just about it, I also read Ali Smith's novel Summer, the final book in her seasonal quartet. And but I didn't just read this because I wanted to go back and see a lot of the past connections between this and the other novels. So I went back and I read I didn't read all of them, but I read part of the books of Autumn and Winter, but then also read the entirety of Spring. And I just wanted to sort of see how the characters and events and sort of situations might like overlap between all of the four novels and just sort of refresh my mind about that before going into this final book, which I'm really glad that I did because a lot of them recur in this final novel and come back to play into the story. I mean, not just the characters that reappear, but there's also like situations. And there's also like a sinister company or firm called SA4A, which runs throughout all of the novels, which is a sort of detention center or immigration center, however you want to sort of frame how it's called, that runs throughout the novels and has this presence in them, which also comes back into play in this book. And so as a big fan of the series, I really enjoyed seeing how all those came to play in this. And even though like I think you could probably just read this and enjoy it on its own, you really won't appreciate it as much if you haven't read the previous books. So if you've not read any of the seasonal quartet yet, I would really suggest going back and reading Autumn first and, you know, reading them in order, so then Winter and Spring, and before finally coming to Summer, because they really are basically one book and come together as one book, and it'll be interesting to see in the coming months. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but at some point all four of these books are going to be published all together in one big volume, which is going to be amazing. I can't wait to get a copy of that, so that you can just then read them all together. I mean, it'll be quite a long novel, and I guess it'll be about probably 1,000 or 1,200 pages, so it'll be quite epic for you know, in sort of Ali Smith's terms, who often writes much sort of slighter novels. Part of what I like love and appreciate about this, because so much of the books are made up of these conversations and dialogues between characters, which are very humorous and funny and witty, and bring in all of this like fun wordplay and sort of tease out the meanings of different words so that we see them from a very different point of view, and I just really enjoy that. And she's also focuses a lot on like cross-generational conversations, so a lot of the funny dialogue at the beginning of this is made up between a daughter and her mother, who is Grace and Sasha. Grace is a mother, a single mother who is recently divorced from her husband and who's a former actress, and Sasha, her daughter, is very cutting and funny and very smart and clever. Ali Smith's really great at writing these smart and insightful adolescent characters. I mean, I think her fiction has a real hopefulness to it in that she looks to these new generations and sees that they have a lot of cleverness and ingenuity, and so hopefully that'll bode well for the future and tackling all of the problems of the world. But then also Grace's other child is an adolescent boy named Robert, who is much more feisty and combative, and he does these like very shocking things and says these very shocking things, like partly to have, I think, just for like the effect, and in that way I thought he was quite realistic. Although one thing I didn't think was entirely realistic was the daughter Sasha. She talks about finding out what all of her friends are doing on Facebook, and I don't think that many adolescents are on Facebook anymore or join Facebook or want to be a part of it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some, I'm sure some still do. But yeah, that was just like one little detail where I thought like maybe Ali Smith isn't so like in touch with this generation as maybe she thinks she is. But yeah, there's a lot in this, and in Spring also about sort of social media and playing upon that. Like there's really brilliant sections in Spring which are sort of making fun of social media and this sort of play on social media, where there's another adolescent girl in this that writes these like short stories which are kind of plays on the stream of social media and all these voices that are having these loud arguments with each other in the ether. There's also a lot in this book about brother and sister relationships. So obviously there's Robert and Sasha, but then also one of a character from a previous novel, Daniel Gluck. It goes into a lot more of his backstory, and you see his time during World War II, how he was separated from his sister, and so it goes into some of his sister's point of view and how they're kind of separated from each other, but nevertheless feel this connection with each other. The way she pairs these different like periods of time and how they're events which recur throughout history in different forms is so poignant and meaningful. But I'm sure there's still a lot of details that I missed in this book and over all of these books about their connections with each other. I think they're books you can read and reread and get a lot more out of by returning to them, because I think she's slipped in a lot of details, and because they're very kind of almost episodic in the way, in that she'll have these scenes and then it'll go to a scene which seems almost incongruous or that has nothing to do with the other one, that there can be a lot of connections which you don't sort of see quite at first. So I'm sure I'm going to be reading these novels again over the coming years and discovering a lot of new things in them. But yeah, I'm just so happy that she sort of followed through with this very ambitious project and brought it to its final fruition. I think it's such an amazing accomplishment overall. So if you've been reading these novels, I'd love to hear about how you think the stories have developed over the years and the many different like plot lines between all of them. Also, in addition to all of these, I have been reading some other books for the Costa Book Awards, but can't really talk about those yet or now because we're still in the process of judging them. But yeah, so I've been reading a lot of other great things, and it's really exciting. So yeah, really busy, but a lot of great reading. So those are all the books. Let me know, any of your thoughts on any of these, if you've read them as well, or if you're interested in reading them now, and we can have a chat in the comments below. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're staying healthy. I guess we'll see how I'm doing when I get my results back soon. Hopefully I'll get them back soon. But yeah, hope you're reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon.